Hi, my name is Abby Rajanov, and I am a current illustration student at art school. And if you want to see how I did this gouache painting of a Japanese storefront, then you can keep on watching. All right, so here is my sketchbook. Um, this is what I'm going to be painting in today. This is a mixed media moleskin, if anybody is wondering, but the cool thing about gouache is it works on relatively any surface. You can use it on illustration board, watercolor paper, but it also takes really well on mixed media paper too. So you can do little sketchbook gouache. So I'm gonna be painting this picture that I took in Japan of this cute little storefront. So I'm just gonna sketch this out first, nothing too tight, just kind of some rough outlines of generally where things should go. So when I paint, the only thing I have to worry about is light and color and not necessarily like perspective or the structure of things, because I'll already have that kind of mapped out. So I'm going in sketching with a Prismacolor Colorase pencil, and I chose a reddish color so that when I put gouache over it, it'll kind of melt in with it and fit with the color scheme that I want, which is a complementary color scheme of red and green. I'm starting out blocking out my more organic shapes super loosely, not worrying about perfect perspective or detail, so if something is in the wrong place, I can move it easily without losing too much work. I'm also thinking a lot about composition as I'm sketching it, because not only am I trying to follow the reference, but I'm also trying to make an illustration that looks nice and pleasing to the eye. I'm creating balance in the composition by varying the heights of my objects. I have taller trees on the left, and that creates a really nice balance with kind of the shorter-ish sign on the right, but it's still taller than the things kind of around it. And the organic shapes add nice contrast to the more geometric shapes with a lot of strong verticals and horizontals. As I draw too, I'm also trying to be conscious of making objects overlap with each other, since that creates a greater sense of depth and avoids tangents, which is when objects awkwardly kind of graze or touch each other kind of perfectly, and it just looks kind of awkward and out of place and draws attention to areas where you probably don't want attention to be drawn. So tangents should try to be avoided when you're sketching out a composition. So now I'm gonna go back and kind of double check my perspective, and I'm gonna give you guys a quick perspective tip. The perspective in this picture isn't too bad. It's just 1 point perspective, so basically that means there's only one vanishing point on the horizon line, so all of these lines kind of receding back into space all only go to 1 point, and from what I gather in the image, I think the horizon line is probably like around up here-ish. And you can kind of judge that if you look at the picture, and the more horizontal these kind of receding lines get, the closer they get to the horizon line. And because the most horizontal line is kind of the top of this sign, and it kind of goes like pretty horizontal actually the more I look at it, that probably means the horizon line is somewhere up here. Alright, so I think I pretty much am finished with my sketch. It didn't take too long. I definitely wanted to spend enough time on it where I pretty much knew exactly where everything is supposed to go, but not too much time that I'm like putting in every little detail that's just ultimately going to get covered up by the paint anyway. Obviously, how much you sketch out is up to you. For me though, I think this is kind of at a level that I'm cool with moving into paint. Alright, so I think I'm ready to start painting. I got all my painting stuff here. So I have my gouache box here, and this is just a airtight kind of sealed box that I got off of Amazon, a little palette box, and I kind of marked like all my names of the colors on top just so I know. But if I go ahead and open this up, so if I open it up, I just have some of my colors. I used to kind of just take color out of the tube and pour it right into my palette, but I found that they would dry out really fast because the palette just kind of stays out. But what's nice about this is that, you know, you use it when you're painting and it's open and everything, but then as soon as you're done, you can just close it. And the paint stays like relatively wet, but if you ever need to kind of re-wet it a little bit at the start of every painting session, I go ahead and use one of these little spray bottles, and I just kind of spritz, and just it kind of re-wets everything. And yeah, and then I have this this is like a little palette box. I got this on Amazon. It's like a little watercolor palette situation. So I'm gonna have this off to the side so you guys can kind of see a little bit. I don't want to take too much away from the painting, but you guys can kind of see a little bit of like me mixing my colors, because I know that can be kind of confusing if this is your first time working with gouache. And I also have like a water bowl kind of set to the side, out of frame. So I'm gonna be using that kind of just to dip my brush in water and re-wet it. Re-wet it. Goodness gracious. And then I have my brushes that I have. I'll kind of talk more specifically about which brush I'm using as I go. But I think we can start. So this is definitely my favorite part of the painting process because it's where you just get to go crazy and go stupid. I'm using this fan brush to kind of spot immediate reactions to the color I see from my reference and just plop them down on the page right away so I get the vibe, I guess, established really early on, but I can still clean it up later because it's gouache and it's opaque. So this picture is actually pretty dark. So the reason why I'm going pretty dark pretty quickly is because when you're working in gouache, you can typically work dark to light because gouache is opaque enough where you can go over your darker areas with a lighter paint and, you know, it'll still show up. And I actually prefer to work that way because I often find myself a little bit too scared to go as dark as I should be going. So I feel like if I just try to push my dark values really early and then kind of hop in later with those brighter colors when kind of adding in the details, then I can more easily get a full value range, if that makes sense, rather than working from light to dark when typically your details are a little bit lighter and you have to kind of go around what you just did in the darker colors. I feel like that's a little bit clunkier. And I'm also paying attention to the temperature of colors because I am noticing that it is kind of warmer towards the center. It's kind of subtle, but you know, when you're painting, it's really cool because you can kind of push those subtleties. So I'm adding more kind of like magentas and reds towards the middle, but I'm kind of cooling it out and leaning more towards green as I go to the side. I actually really like working on dirty palettes, especially if they're kind of already the same kind of colors you're going for. This was an old like dried up gouache from a little bit ago when I did some of my other Japan environment studies, and I prefer to kind of use dried up paint not only because you save that money on new paint, but also because, you know, I feel like it's easier to get more neutral, natural looking tones when you're kind of working what's already there, because I feel like if you're mixing your colors brand new, sometimes it's harder to like get those in between more neutral tones. I'm definitely struggling a lot with this like pavement because it's like in the photo it's like gray because it's pavement, you know, but it's kind of hard to translate that because you can obviously make gray when you paint by just mixing black and white, but I feel like that dulls it out so much. So I'm trying to do something my professor suggested, where he said if you were to assign this, you know, pretty neutral color, a color on the color wheel, what would it be? And for me, I think it's kind of like a yellow-green. That's just how I'm seeing it. I feel like right now it's leaning a little bit too blue, but I feel like I really need to start pushing it more green. And also I need to make it lighter because the value is kind of blending in a little bit too much. So I'm gonna see if maybe this helps a little bit. Yeah, I'm just gonna try to start adding in, like, when I lighten it, add yellow and white to lighten, just so it adds a little bit of that hue that I want, the yellow hue. I'm not a huge fan of using black in my gouache paintings that much, just because it kind of washes out all the color, and I like it when shadows have more saturation in them. So I try to mix really dark colors, as dark as I can, without using black, and save it for when I absolutely need it. The way I usually mix really dark colors is I am mixing that dark purple I have up there with some blue, and if you use more pigment and less water, you can get colors pretty dark. I think at this point I haven't used black at all, and I'm getting a pretty good range of dark values. However, I will end up needing to add black just to punch in those really dark darks, but I would refrain from using black as much as possible until you absolutely need to. I think it's coming somewhat together. These little signs right here look kind of rough, but I was just gonna wait for that layer to dry so I can go back and reinforce it. I'm trying to paint in the lantern right here, and I'm just gonna kind of fill in all these shapes that I left blank because I was filling in the negative space for. I feel like it's time to kind of start defining those a little bit more, because also that'll help give me a better idea of like the value and color range, since I left all the plants out. So there's not a lot of green in here, and I was definitely planning on it being like kind of a red-green type of scenario, but there's not a lot of green, so I'm gonna add some green. So at this point in the painting, I was kind of feeling a little bit about it. I remember thinking that my values are too similar. Everything looks really muddy. There's not a lot of clarity, and I just thought I was in such an ugly phase, and I was definitely beating myself up because I wanted to push myself to create a stronger value range, because I thought that's what I was kind of lacking in my earlier paintings. So I was frustrated because the darks I put in at the very beginning weren't really looking that dark now. They look kind of gray and gross. So it made me kind of sad. So this led me to kind of make the decision to just bite the bullet and force myself to just use darker colors, even though I'm pretty scared of adding black to gouache. And I typically don't encourage doing that because it washes out the color, but sometimes you just gotta do what you gotta do. So something I kind of want to talk about, just to kind of be honest with my struggles as an artist, because I feel like, I don't know, a lot of people aren't, and I feel like there's a lot of pressure to act like, especially when I'm trying to give a demo, try to act like I know everything, and everything I do is great, and everyone else should do it, and I'm perfect. Like, I am far from perfect. I have like so much more to go. And I think something really interesting that I learned about, one of my professors told me
was something called the gap. Basically, the more you learn about what good art is, and the more you learn to recognize what makes a good piece, the higher your standards are, if that makes sense. So it's like a higher bar that you need to kind of reach when you make your own art. Your taste in art grows way faster than your skill, because skill needs obviously needs time to build up and time to master, but it's not that time consuming to learn what good color theory is, and how to paint with really nice textures, and how to be expressive in your art, and all these great things. And when you learn to recognize those things, you feel like great about yourself, because you're like, oh, I see this really great piece of art and I know why it's great. It's great because the character is so expressive, and it's great because the silhouette's so strong, and it's great because the colors have a complementary color scheme, and whatever it is, like, why it's great. But when you sit down and you try to replicate that same quality of work, you get frustrated because you can't, because your skill hasn't reached your taste yet. So that's the gap. It's the gap between your taste and your knowledge versus your skill. And a lot of artists, kind of when they're around our age, like when we're like teens, young adults, and starting to get serious about it, they're bombarded with like so much information, and it's frustrating because obviously your art's not going to grow as fast. So you do feel like you're stuck in the gap, and I find myself disappointed a lot of the times with what I end up producing. But at the end of the day, that's actually a good thing, because it shows that your taste is improving, and that's honestly great, because then you can recognize your own flaws in your work, and your skill will get there. If you just keep practicing, it'll get there. It hasn't gotten there for me yet. Sometimes it does. Sometimes I surprise myself when I make something. I'm like, oh, I didn't think that I could do something like that. But the more practice, the more likely you are to close the gap. So don't get discouraged if things aren't turning out exactly like you plan, because you'll get there. Just keep working at it, and you'll get there.
So at this point, I'm just putting in some final details. I feel like everything is pretty well established, if that makes sense. I have all my shapes, I have all my colors, and I like the way the colors are looking. So I think at this point I'm kind of just really pushing my darks and making sure that my darkest darks still stay dark, because the thing about gouache is, according to my vision and what I've noticed, is it dries a lot lighter than you originally think it is when you first put it down. So I'm constantly checking and making sure that I have those darks in the painting, and as I go, I'm using less water and more paint in my mixture. As you go in a gouache painting, you want to eventually work from washy to opaque, so just keep an eye out for your mixture. So we're reaching the end of the painting here, and right now I'm trying to do the lettering on the lantern and the sign. This was actually a pretty fun challenge. It really forced me to be patient and have a steady hand, so I just did it with a really small detail brush, and I think the lettering turned out pretty decent. I really thought I would have to cover it up, but turns out it's pretty nice. Look at that.
And with that, I think we're done. Yeah. I'm actually really happy with how this turned out. I think it went really well. Damn. Okay. I was really panicked pretty much the entire time. Um, Whenever I started filming and I put those like first colors down for the first like 20 minutes, I was like, this is gonna turn into an absolute train wreck. Oh my god. But I'm very happy with the way it turned out. Oh my gosh. Well, this is my gouache demo.
Anyways, my brain just decided to stop talking here, but I want to say thank you so much for watching. I hope I taught you something. If you want to see the final piece, it is up on my Instagram. Maybe give it a follow. I don't know, but good luck, guys. Happy painting. Thank you.